The dream was a good one. I was surfing a wave of perfectly executed Python script, the client was ecstatic, and my bank account was singing opera. Then, reality, in its infinite cruelty, decided to serenade me with a chainsaw. Brrrr. The noise didn't just wake me, it practically vibrated my teeth out of my skull. I shot up in bed, heart doing a passable impression of a hummingbird on a triple espresso. My first coherent thought, after the initial, "Is this the apocalypse and am I wearing clean underwear?" was, Gary finally did it. He bought that decommissioned jet engine he was eyeing for his lawn care needs. I dragged myself to the window, limbs heavy with the injustice of interrupted sleep, and pried open the blinds. The scene that greeted me was less Gary and his Frankenstein leaf blower and more, well, a massacre. Two burly guys, who looked like they moonlighted as bouncers for a particularly rough biker bar, were taking a roaring chainsaw to Old Man Hemlock. Old Man Hemlock. The majestic oak at the entrance to our cul-de-sac, a tree that had stood sentinel since before Sunny Meadows Estates, was a twinkle in a developer's eye. Wood chips flew like angry wooden bees. No, I muttered, scrambling for the jeans I'd discarded on the floor the night before. This wasn't just any tree. This was the neighborhood's soul, the provider of shade, the climbing gym for generations of kids, the silent witness to countless block parties and teenage trysts. My blood pressure, usually as calm as a hibernating sloth, started to climb. My internal monologue was already screaming one name. This has Karen written all over it, only she could find a way to make oxygen production an actionable offense. I burst out of my front door, hair probably looking like a startled cockatoo, and still with the imprint of a pillowcase seam on my cheek. The noise was a physical assault. And there she was, the architect of this arboreal atrocity, Karen Henderson. Yes, Henderson. The irony of her sharing a name with our lovely weeping Mrs. Henderson from next door was a cruelty the universe particularly enjoyed. She stood with arms crossed, a clipboard, her ever-present scepter of suburban tyranny, tucked under one arm. She was nodding with grim satisfaction, like a Roman emperor watching a particularly satisfying gladiator match. "Karen!" I yelled, trying to pitch my voice over the demonic scream of the chainsaw. "What in the actual hell is going on?" She didn't even bother to turn. Her voice, when it came, was coated in that special brand of condescension she reserved for us mere mortals who hadn't ascended to the lofty heights of HOA presidency. "Oh, Michael, good morning. We're just making some necessary civic improvements. Beautification project, you know?" "Beautification?" My voice cracked. "You're murdering Old Man Hemlock. Did you get a permit for this? These are city trees, Karen. You can't just whack 'em down like overgrown weeds." Karen finally deigned to turn, fixing me with a look that could probably curdle a cement mixer. "As HOA president, Michael, I determine what's necessary for the community. These trees were obstructive." She waved a dismissive hand at the noble oak. "Their roots were problematic for the sidewalk integrity, and frankly their leaf shedding was becoming a seasonal nuisance." "Problematic? Nuisance?" I sputtered. "They've been here longer than the sidewalks. They are the scenery. Did you even talk to anyone? Put it to a vote? Send up a smoke signal?" She scoffed, a sound like air escaping a punctured inflatable crown. "It's an executive decision, Michael, clearly outlined in Bylaw 7, subsection C, paragraph 4. Presidential discretion for community enhancement. You should really read your HOA handbook sometime. It's quite illuminating." She tapped her clipboard meaningfully. "Besides, the canopy was far too dense. We need more sunlight for the petunias I plan to install." "Petunias?" I felt my jaw unhinge. "You're killing a centenarian oak for petunias? And leaves? They're trees, Karen, that's what they do. It's in their job description. One of the lumberjacks, perhaps sensing an impending aneurysm on my part, revved his chainsaw with gusto. The top of Old Man Hemlock gave a heart-wrenching groan, a sound that seemed to echo through the suddenly too quiet morning, and then began a slow, agonizing lean. It crashed to the earth with a thud that shook the ground and, I swear, made the birds fall silent in mourning. They didn't stop there. Oh no. Karen, now fully in her element as the demon barber of Elm Street, directed her crew to 2 more mature maples down the block. Our street, once a leafy haven, was rapidly transforming into a sun-scorched desert. It looked naked, violated. Sunlight, harsh and unwelcome, beat down where cool, dappled shade had always been. Mrs. Henderson, the nice Mrs. Henderson, was standing on her porch, tears streaming down her face. Even Gary, whose primary concerns usually revolved around the precise millimeter height of his fescue, looked grim. Karen supervised the loading of the butchered logs onto a flatbed truck, looking as pleased as a cat who'd not only gotten the cream, but also the entire dairy farm. "This isn't right, Mrs. H," I said, my voice hoarse, walking over to her. There's no way she had the authority to do this without a city permit, at the very least, bylaw or no bylaw. Mrs. Henderson sniffled, dabbing her eyes with a crumpled tissue. "That woman, she came by yesterday, all smiles, talking about enhancing our curb appeal and improving sightlines. She said something about them blocking the new aesthetic uniformity she's planning." Aesthetic uniformity. It sounded like something out of a dystopian novel. Aesthetic uniformity? I muttered to myself. Sounds like a fancy term for whatever Karen wants, Karen gets, and to hell with the rest of us. I looked at the gaping holes in our streetscape, at the raw, weeping stumps. Anger, cold and hard, settled in my gut. This wasn't just about trees anymore. This was about a petty tyrant on a power trip. And I, Mike Johnson, lover of peace, quiet, and well-established root systems, was not going to let her get away with it. My next stop? City Hall. I burned a vacation day for this. That's how serious I was. Forget debugging the Peterson account. I had a Karen to debug. The local city planning department was exactly as I'd pictured. A symphony of intermittently ringing phones, the rhythmic clatter of keyboards manned by people who looked like they'd lost the will to live somewhere around 1997, and the pervasive, faint aroma of stale coffee and broken dreams. I approached a counter presided over by a woman whose name tag read Doris, and whose expression suggested she'd seen every form of human desperation and was thoroughly unimpressed. "Excuse me," I began, trying for a polite, non-threatening tone. "Hi, I need to inquire about tree removal permits for the Elm Street cul-de-sac in Sunny Meadows Estates." Doris didn't even look up from her monitor, which was displaying what appeared to be a game of solitaire circa Windows 95. Form 34B, subsection A, Arboreal Alteration Inquiries. Fill it out in triplicate. Standard processing time is 6 to 8 weeks, assuming the lunar cycle is favorable and we haven't run out of appropriately colored ink. "Actually," I pressed on, "the trees have already been removed this morning, and I suspect illegally, by our HOA president." That got her attention. One perfectly sculpted eyebrow, which looked like it could cut glass, arched towards her hairline. "HOA, you say?" She sighed, a sound heavy with the weight of 1,000 such disputes. "Oh, joy. Name of HOA. Sunny Meadows Estates." Doris typed with 2 fingers, her brow furrowed in concentration, or possibly just annoyance. A long, drawn-out pause stretched, filled only by the hum of the ancient fluorescent lights. She finally said. "Funny thing. No permits have been issued for any tree removal on Elm Street or anywhere in Sunny Meadows Estates for the last 5 years. We're very strict about mature city trees. They're considered a municipal asset." A small, triumphant grin started to spread across my face. So she just did it? Without any authorization? Doris almost cracked a smile. Looks like your HOA president might be in a bit of a pickle, a rather large, woody pickle, if you catch my drift. She slid a different colored form across the counter. You'll want to file a complaint. Form 72 Delta, Unauthorized Municipal Asset Alteration Report. That'll trigger an investigation from Environmental Services. They take this stuff pretty seriously. Thank you, Doris, I said, feeling a surge of adrenaline. You have no idea how helpful this has been. Honey, she said, finally making eye contact, a flicker of something almost human in her gaze. I live for these moments. Now go forth and give 'em hell. Armed with official confirmation of Karen's transgression, I felt like a knight ready to slay a particularly irritating, clipboard-wielding dragon. Karen, in her infinite wisdom, had called an emergency HOA meeting. The irony of holding it in the now sun-scorched community park, which used to be shaded by the very trees she'd executed, was apparently lost on her. Several other neighbors, emboldened by my initial digging and their own simmering outrage, were there too, looking like a tiny, disgruntled army. Karen stood before us, resplendent in a powder-blue pantsuit that screamed, "Authority," in a slightly off-key way. As I was explaining before, Michael so rudely interrupted our previous beautification efforts, she began, her voice echoing slightly in the open air. The removal of those overgrown shrubs was vital for the community's visual appeal and long-term sidewalk safety. A proactive measure, really. Shrubs? I stepped forward, my voice ringing with indignation. Karen, they were 50-foot oak and maple trees, trees that had been here for decades, and I spoke to the city. There are no permits. What you did wasn't just a proactive measure, and it was illegal. A murmur rippled through the small crowd. Eyes darted between me and Karen. Karen's eye twitched. Just a little, but I saw it. The city's bureaucracy is notoriously slow, Michael. I was acting proactively to prevent potential hazards. Sometimes leadership requires decisive action, not endless red tape and committee meetings. Mr. Henderson, the nice Mr. Henderson, bless his cotton socks, piped up, his voice trembling slightly, but firm. Decisive action that destroyed decades of growth and shade, Karen. My air conditioning bill is going to skyrocket. And what about the birds? Where will they go? Karen waved a dismissive hand. A small price to pay for progress, Mr. Henderson. And think of the reduced leaf litter in the fall. So much less raking for everyone. And the new petunias will be lovely. I've picked out a delightful variegated variety. I swear I could almost hear the collective groan. This woman was unbelievable. She was actually doubling down, trying to spin the destruction of beloved neighborhood landmarks into a community service. My internal monologue was having a field day. She's actually proud of this. She thinks she's a hero. This woman's audacity has its own gravitational pull, and it's sucking all the common sense out of a 5-block radius. The meeting devolved from there, with Karen stonewalling every concern and repeating her mantra of presidential discretion and community enhancement until she was blue in the face, or rather, her pantsuit was. It was clear she wasn't going to admit any wrongdoing. A few days later, I was in my front yard, attempting to coax some life back into my now scorched flower beds with a watering can, when a police cruiser glided to a stop at my curb. 2 officers, Miller and Davies, emerged. My stomach did a little flip-flop. Had Karen actually called the cops on me? The sheer nerve. "Michael Johnson?" Officer Miller asked, his hand resting casually on his belt. "Yes, officer. Is there a problem?" I tried to sound calm, like I wasn't mentally cataloging every minor infraction I might have committed in the last decade. Did I ever return that library book from 2012? Officer Davies consulted a notepad. "We got a call about a neighborhood disturbance, something about trees?" He sounded about as thrilled as if he'd been called to mediate a dispute over the correct way to hang toilet paper. "Oh, that," I said, a wave of relief mixed with renewed frustration washing over me. "Yes, our HOA president, Karen Henderson, had several mature street trees illegally cut down a few days ago. I filed a complaint with the city, and they confirmed no permits were issued." Officer Miller glanced towards Karen's house, where I could just make out the twitch of a curtain. "Right, ma'am over there," he said, nodding in Karen's direction. "Said you were harassing her and inciting unrest over approved landscaping modifications." I almost choked. "Approved by who? Herself?" "Officer, she violated city ordinances. I have documentation from the planning department confirming no permits were issued. These were city trees." Officer Davies sighed, the sound of a man who had seen too many petty squabbles. "Look, sir, this really sounds like a civil matter, an HOA dispute. We don't typically get involved unless there's an immediate threat, a breach of the peace, or, actual property damage beyond, well, the trees that are already gone." "But it is property damage," I insisted, my voice rising slightly. "It's damage to city property. It's decimated our property values, and she's trying to intimidate residents who are questioning her." Officer Miller made a non-committal noise. "We'll make a note of it in our report, Mr. Johnson. Our advice would be to try and keep the peace with your neighbors. Maybe work it out through your HOA channels." He gave me a look that said, "Good luck with that, pal." They got back in their cruiser and drove off, leaving me standing there fuming. The cops were no immediate help. It just reinforced the feeling that I was up against Karen's impenetrable wall of self-righteous bureaucracy. This was going to be harder than I thought. I needed something more. I needed a bigger gun, or, as it turned out, a cousin in a high place. That night I was slumped on my couch, mainlining lukewarm soda and doom-scrolling through internet forums titled things like, "HOA President Gone Rogue, Help," and "Can my HOA legally outlaw joy?" My brain felt like a tangled ball of Christmas lights. The city was investigating, sure, but that could take weeks, months even. In the meantime, Karen was strutting around like she'd single-handedly saved us from a Triffid invasion. Then it hit me. Not like a gentle epiphany, more like a rogue line of code that suddenly, inexplicably, compiles. Leo, my cousin Leo. We weren't super close. More of a Christmas and major holidays kind of family connection. We exchanged the occasional awkward birthday text. But I had this vague, nagging memory from last Thanksgiving. Aunt Carol, Leo's mom, had been bragging. Something about Leo getting a big promotion. He worked for the state. Something to do with trees? Nature? Parks and recreation, but less Leslie Knope and more official? My fingers, suddenly energized, flew across my laptop keyboard. Leo Maxwell State Forestry Commission. The search results popped up. And there he was, Leo Maxwell, Deputy Director, State Forestry Commission. His official photo showed him in a crisp, forest green, ranger-style uniform, looking serious and impressively important, standing next to a redwood that looked like it had personally witnessed the dinosaurs. Holy moly! My heart started doing that hummingbird thing again, but this time it was from excitement, not rage or caffeine. I fumbled for my phone, thumbs suddenly clumsy. "Leo? Hey, it's your cousin Mike. Yeah, Mike from, well, Aunt Carol's son. Mike Johnson. Listen, this is going to sound completely insane, and possibly like I've finally cracked under the pressure of suburban living." I then proceeded to pour out the entire saga. The rude awakening by chainsaw, Karen's smug pronouncements, the clipboard of doom, her bizarre justifications about obstructive leaves and aesthetic uniformity. The city's confirmation of illegality, the cops' polite dismissal. I probably sounded like a lunatic, but I was desperate. There was a long pause on the other end of the line when I finally ran out of steam. I could hear Leo breathing, a slow, steady rhythm. Finally he spoke, his voice as calm and even as a forest pond, but with an undercurrent I couldn't quite place. She cut down mature street trees, Mike, multiple trees, without a city permit, and she's the HOA president of Sunny Meadows Estates, you said? That's the psycho in a nutshell, yes, I confirmed, feeling a bit deflated. Maybe this was too small fry for a deputy director. And these trees were on Elm Street, in the cul-de-sac, and along the main stretch? Leo pressed. Yeah, why? Does that matter? Another pause, shorter this time. Mikey, he said, and the use of my childhood nickname made me sit up straighter. Those aren't just city trees. That entire greenbelt along Elm Street, including the cul-de-sac, is part of a state-protected urban canopy initiative. We, the State Forestry Commission, have an environmental easement on that specific area. I was stunned into silence. I think my mouth was literally hanging open. You're kidding me, right? A protected what now? Nope, Leo said, and I could almost hear a hint of a smile in his voice. We oversee designated urban forests and green belts to maintain ecological balance, air quality, and stormwater management. Removing mature trees from a protected zone without extensive state-level environmental impact studies and explicit permits from our office? That's not good. Not good at all for your HOA president, Mikey. That's a whole different league of trouble. A protected urban canopy initiative. Karen, you magnificent, clueless idiot. You didn't just step on a rake in the dark. You strapped on a jetpack, aimed for the moon, and somehow landed squarely in a hornet's nest the size of Texas. So, I managed, my voice weak with dawning, glorious realization. What does this mean? It means, Leo said, his voice taking on a new, sharper edge, that I'll be making a few calls tomorrow morning. It means your HOA president is about to discover that presidential discretion doesn't quite cover tangling with state environmental regulations. Get me all the details, photos, names, anything you have. Email it to my official address. I practically floated off the couch. The bigger gun had arrived, and it was armed with state statutes and an official insignia. A few days passed. I tried to act normal, water my dying petunias, no thanks to Karen's sun-drenched improvements, and go about my work. But internally, I was practically vibrating with a mixture of anticipation and a tiny bit of gleeful malice. Then, an email landed in my inbox. It had an official letterhead, State Forestry Commission, Division of Urban Ecology. It was a formal notification addressed to the Sunny Meadows Estates Homeowners Association, CC'd to me, Michael Johnson, as the original complainant via City of Pleasantville Environmental Services, of an upcoming site assessment and compliance review due to reported unauthorized removal of protected arboreal assets within a designated state urban canopy zone. Arboreal assets. Leo, you beautiful bureaucratic wordsmith. I could just imagine Karen trying to decipher that one with her dog-eared HOA bylaws. The original tree removal guys, the ones who looked like they'd wrestled bears for a living, were long gone, of course. Probably halfway to Canada with their ill-gotten timber money. But Karen, in her infinite and ever-escalating wisdom, had decided the bare patches of earth where majestic trees once stood were now an eyesore. No kidding, Karen. You absolute genius. So, she'd hired some new contractors. If the first crew looked shady, this new lot looked like they'd crawled out from under a rock that had itself been hiding under another, even slimier rock. They had a battered pickup truck that wheezed more than it ran, and their idea of landscaping attire was ripped tank tops and expressions of profound disinterest. They were attempting to plant these spindly, pathetic-looking ornamental pear trees, the kind that snap in the first stiff breeze and smell faintly of rotten fish when they bloom. Aesthetic uniformity, my foot. I wandered over, feigning casual curiosity. "Hey guys, nice. Twigs," I offered. You know there's a pending state investigation on this whole area, right? Regarding the rather large trees that were here before?" Contractor number 1, a greasy specimen with a bandana that had seen better decades, wiped sweat from his brow with the back of an even greasier hand. "Lady just pays us to plant what's on the order. We plant. Not our problem what was here before or what happens after." "Right," I said. "But these aren't even suitable for this climate long term. They'll be dead in a year. And speaking of what was here before, what happened to all the wood from the old trees? Did she sell it?" That was some prime oak and maple. Contractor number 2, who had been silently excavating a hole roughly the size of a teacup, spat a brown stream of something onto the parched earth. "Dunno. She said it was reclaimed for community mulch project. Looked like grade A hardwood to me. Could have made a fortune in firewood alone." "Community mulch," I repeated, tasting the lie. It was probably lining her prize-winning rose bushes or bartered for a lifetime supply of variegated petunias. More fuel for the fire. Misuse of the removed timber could be another charge on her rapidly expanding rap sheet. Karen wasn't just digging a hole for herself anymore. She was excavating a canyon with industrial machinery. The cherry on top of this whole insane Sunday arrived in my mailbox a day later. An official-looking envelope from the Sunny Meadows Estates HOA, not from the state this time. My heart didn't even bother to flutter. I was too far gone for that. Inside, 2 violation notices printed on Karen's signature powder blue paper. The first, violation of Article 4, Section 2. Failure to maintain aesthetic uniformity of front yard landscaping following necessary community improvements, that is, tree removal. Fine. $200. Action required. Immediate installation of HOA-approved flowering annuals. The second, and this was my personal favorite, violation of Article 9, Section 5, unauthorized and disruptive communication with external municipal and state agencies, thereby causing undue duress and potential financial liability to the HOA Executive Board and its president. Fine. $500. Action required. Cease and desist all such communications immediately. I actually laughed out loud, a barking sound that probably startled the squirrels. She was fining me for reporting her illegal activity to the proper authorities? Oh, this was beyond rich. This was comedic gold. "Undue duress?" I said to my empty living room. "Lady, you ain't seen duress yet. This is going straight to Leo." I snapped a photo of the violations and emailed them to my cousin with the subject line, "You are not going to believe her latest move." Leo's reply was swift and succinct. "Duly noted, this will be informative for the site assessment team." The day of the site assessment and compliance review dawned bright and clear. The kind of beautiful morning that seemed to mock the ugliness Karen had inflicted upon our street. I'd called in sick to work, a sudden debilitating case of must-see karma-itis. I had a front row seat, my living room window, and a large mug of coffee. Around 9 a.m., they arrived. 2 pristine, dark green trucks with the official State Forestry Commission insignia gleaming on their doors. They didn't rumble or roar. They glided to a stop with a quiet efficiency that somehow seemed far more menacing than the lumberjack's noisy bravado. Out stepped 3 individuals, 2 men and a woman, all in crisp, official-looking uniforms. They moved with a calm, methodical purpose that screamed, "We are professionals, and we are not amused." It was like a signal. Neighbors, sensing the shift in the suburban cosmic winds, began to appear on their porches and in their driveways. Mrs. Henderson was there, a hopeful Kleenex clutched in her hand. Even Gary from down the street, who was usually deep in conversation with his prize-winning azaleas at this hour, put down his pruning shears and watched, rapt. The air, usually filled with the drone of lawnmowers or the distant yapping of a poodle, was thick with a delicious, almost palpable anticipation. Karen, alerted by her finely tuned curtain-twitching early warning system, or maybe just the sudden absence of any other ambient noise, emerged onto her porch. She had her trusty clipboard, of course, but her usual confident, queen-of-all-she-surveys stride was a little tighter. Her smile looked less like a greeting and more like a grimace fighting for control of her face. I leaned forward, practically fogging up the window glass. This was it, the main event. The lead official, the woman, had an air of no-nonsense authority that could probably make a drill sergeant stand up straighter. Let's call her Ranger Davis. She approached Karen, who had descended her porch steps as if preparing to repel invaders. I couldn't hear everything, obviously, but body language is a universal dialect. Ranger Davis spoke in calm, measured tones, gesturing to the sad, brutalized stumps that dotted our once beautiful street. Then to some sort of official-looking tablet she was holding. Ooh, digital clipboards. The state was not messing around, Karen responded, her voice undoubtedly rising in pitch if her increasingly frantic hand gestures were any indication. She was tapping her own paper clipboard with fierce emphasis, probably trying to cite Bylaw 7, subsection C, to a state official who looked about as impressed as if Karen were reciting questionable poetry. Meanwhile, the other two Forestry Commission officials were busy. Ranger Miller, I decided to name him too for narrative neatness, began taking soil samples around the stumps, meticulously placing them in small, labeled bags. The third official was armed with a high-tech camera and was documenting everything, every stump, every poorly planted pear tree, every inch of Karen's ill-conceived beautification. The sheer number of photographs being taken would have made a crime scene investigator proud. Karen was looking increasingly agitated. The reddish hue that had been creeping up her neck during the HOA meeting was back, now engulfing her entire face. Her smugness was visibly cracking, flaking away like old paint to reveal the panic underneath. My internal monologue was providing a running commentary. She's definitely trying to explain the problematic roots defense. Ranger Davis looks like she's heard it all before, probably from people who tried to build unpermitted hot tubs in protected wetlands. Oh, Karen, you are so out of your league. This is like bringing a water pistol to a naval battle. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. The scene I'd replayed in my head 1,000 times with various satisfying embellishments. Ranger Davis said something quiet and decisive to Karen, and Karen just deflated. It was instantaneous. One moment she was a puffed-up pufferfish of indignation, the next, a sad, limp balloon. And then, just to add a little cinematic flair to the proceedings, one of the dark green Forestry Commission truck's passenger doors opened, and out stepped Leo, my cousin Leo, in his full deputy director uniform, complete with shiny badge and an aura of calm authority. He even had sunglasses on, which, I had to admit, looked pretty cool. He walked over to Ranger Davis, who gave him a respectful nod. He surveyed the scene, the butchered trees, the stunned neighbors, the crumbling Karen, and then his eyes met mine through the window. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, a tiny hint of a smile playing on his lips. He strolled over to where Karen was standing, looking like she might faint directly into her newly, and illegally, sun-drenched petunias. Mrs. Henderson? Leo's voice was still calm, still even, but it carried the unmistakable weight of the entire state of, insert your state here, Forestry Commission behind it. I'm Leo Maxwell, Deputy Director. It seems there's been a significant misunderstanding regarding the protected status of these trees. A misunderstanding, he paused, letting the words hang in the air, that carries rather substantial penalties under State Environmental Code 305.7, subsection B, paragraph 12, pertaining to the unauthorized destruction of designated urban canopy assets. Karen stared at him. Then her gaze flickered to me, standing in my window, then back to Leo. You could practically see the rusty gears in her brain grinding, trying to make the connection. Her face went from beet red to a pale, pasty white that clashed horribly with her powder blue pantsuit. "You," she stammered, a trembling finger pointing first at Leo, then shakily towards me. You're his cousin?" I couldn't resist. I leaned out my window, a massive grin plastered across my face. "Surprise!" I called out, my voice probably a little too cheerful. "Did you want to discuss aesthetic uniformity with the Deputy Director, Karen? Or perhaps we could revisit your interpretation of presidential discretion for destroying state-protected arboreal assets. I believe he has the official definition handy." The look on Karen's face was a masterpiece of horrified realization. It was the expression of someone who has just realized they've not only brought a knife to a gunfight, but have also accidentally insulted the gunman's mother and keyed his car. And just when I thought the schadenfreude couldn't get any sweeter, as if on cue, a familiar police cruiser pulled up. Officers Miller and Davies again. But this time their demeanor was entirely different. Ranger Davis flagged them down, and as she started speaking to them, showing them her official ID, her digital clipboard, and gesturing towards the State Forestry Commission trucks and personnel, including a deputy director, their expressions shifted from bored indifference to alert professionalism. Officer Miller's voice was suddenly crisp as he spoke into his shoulder radio. "Yeah, dispatch. This is Unit 7. We're on Elm Street in Sunny Meadows. The situation appears to involve the illegal destruction of state-protected property. We have State Forestry Commission officials on site, including a deputy director. Gonna need a supervising officer down here to liaise. And, he glanced at Karen, who looked like she was about to hyperventilate into her clipboard. Maybe have paramedics staged nearby. The HOA president doesn't look so good. Oh yes, this was better than Netflix. This was Emmy-worthy. The weeks that followed were a blur of official notices arriving in heavy manila envelopes, emergency HOA meetings that were notably subdued and Karen-less in their leadership, and the glorious, almost deafening sound of Karen not being in charge. The State Forestry Commission, as it turned out, did not mess around when it came to their protected urban canopy. Karen was hit with a series of fines that would make a corporate CEO's eyes water. There were penalties for each tree illegally removed, additional fines for failing to obtain the requisite permits, and a particularly hefty one for the willful destruction of mature arboreal assets within a designated environmental easement. Leo later told me the total was enough to require a second mortgage on her meticulously manicured, petunia-filled property. The city, not wanting to be left out of the Justice Party, and probably spurred into action by the state's decisive intervention, also slapped her with their own set of fines for violating municipal codes and failing to secure local permits. It was a veritable symphony of financial retribution. The Sunny Meadows Estate's HOA board, suddenly finding their spines, or perhaps just terrified of being implicated further, convened a special session. The sole item on the agenda: vote of no confidence in President Karen Henderson and motion for her immediate removal from office. Under immense pressure from irate residents, the looming threat of further state and city scrutiny, and probably some very sternly worded advice from whatever lawyer the HOA kept on retainer for just such "oh crap" moments. The motion passed unanimously. Even Karen's former staunchest allies, the ones who had previously nodded along to her every ludicrous pronouncement, quietly voted for her ousting. It was a political bloodbath, suburban style. Karen Henderson, the self-proclaimed Queen of Elm Street, was dethroned. She didn't attend the meeting, sending word through a tearful and clearly terrified HOA secretary that she was indisposed. The transformation was remarkable. Karen went from neighborhood tyrant ruling with an iron clipboard to a deflated pariah. The HOA, shaken to its core, was forced to reevaluate its entire existence, or at least its leadership selection process. And I, Mike Johnson, the quiet coder who just wanted his shade back, had inadvertently become a local folk hero. Mrs. Henderson, the nice one, baked me a pie apple, my favorite. Gary even offered to lend me his new, surprisingly quiet, electric leaf blower. Leo, true to his word and his official capacity, helped coordinate the remediation plan for Elm Street. The State Forestry Commission didn't just fine Karen, they mandated a comprehensive replanting strategy. No spindly, non-native pear trees this time. The order specified mature, native species. Oaks, maples, maybe even a sturdy elm or two, chosen for their ecological benefits and long-term viability. They even recommended a specialist to oversee the project, a wonderfully eccentric arborist named Professor Alastair Bloom. Professor Bloom was a character straight out of a whimsical children's book. He had a wild mane of white hair, spectacles perched on the end of his nose, and he genuinely seemed to communicate with the trees, often patting their trunks and murmuring encouraging words to them. He also insisted on playing classical music Bach, mostly via a portable speaker during the planting process, claiming it soothed their root systems and encouraged robust growth. I found myself out on the street, watching as Professor Bloom and his team carefully installed a beautiful young red oak in the very spot where Old Man Hemlock had stood. "Ah, yes," Professor Bloom declared, adjusting his spectacles and beaming at the sapling. "A Quercus rubra for this hallowed ground, I think. She'll enjoy the morning sun and the afternoon dappled light. Strong roots, this one. Resilient. Not like those flimsy Pyrus caloriana so many HOAs favor. All surface, no substance, you see. No real character." He winked at me. "Rather like some people, wouldn't you agree?" "You can say that again, Professor," I chuckled. "We've had our share of all surface, no substance around here lately." The physical healing of our street began. The new trees, though smaller than their predecessors, were a symbol of a fresh start, a promise of future shade and beauty. The sight of them, carefully staked and mulched, brought a sense of peace I hadn't realized I'd been missing so acutely. A few months later, life on Elm Street had settled into a new, significantly less tyrannical normal. The new trees were taking root, their leaves unfurling in the spring sunshine. The street felt lighter, both literally and figuratively. I saw Karen sometimes. She still lived in her house, a monument to variegated petunias and poor life choices. But she was a changed woman. She scurried from her front door to her car, avoiding eye contact with everyone. The ever-present clipboard was gone. The smug, self-satisfied smirk had been replaced by a perpetual frown. She was diminished, a queen in exile in her own cul-de-sac. The new HOA president was, believe it or not, Gary from down the street. His campaign platform had been refreshingly simple. No more stupid rules, full transparency in all mulch-related matters, and better leaf blowers for all, to be used only within reasonable, mutually agreed-upon hours, so help me God. I could live with that. Our first HOA meeting under his leadership involved actual donuts and a civil discussion about whether to invest in a communal snowblower. Progress. Leo called me every now and then, just to check in and, I suspect, to get a little amusement from my suburban dispatches. "So, Mikey," he said during one such call, his voice laced with laughter. "Any more rogue landscaping empires rising in your neck of the woods? Any rogue petunia planting syndicates I should be aware of?" "Nah, I think the neighborhood's learned its lesson, Leo," I said, looking out my window at the young oak that was already showing promising growth. "Thanks again, man. You really saved our canopy. And possibly my sanity." "Any time, cousin," Leo replied. "Just remember, don't mess with the trees. And definitely don't mess with my nerdy code-writing cousin when he's defending his urban foliage." I hung up, a smile on my face. Yeah, aesthetic uniformity. Turns out nature had a pretty good handle on that concept all along. And sometimes, all it takes to remind people of that simple truth is a well-placed cousin in the State Forestry Commission and an HOA president who flew a little too close to the sun on wings made of bylaws and bad intentions. The trees were growing, the street was healing, and Karen Henderson was finally, blessedly, just another resident. A quiet one at that.